Hey, it's your boy Pharrell. I'm a huge fan of Tim Graham and Friends. Then again, who isn't? Shake it, ooh.
CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
Hi, this is Josh Reed, Sports Director at WIVB Channel 4 in Buffalo, and you are listening to the Tim Graham and Friends podcast.
What are you doing?
Tim's been bothering me to do this thing for his podcast. Oh, sorry. I got to stop this, I guess.
The NFL announced its new salary cap for 2026, and it will be $301 million, up from $279 million, but not as high as it could have been. There was a projection that it could go as high as $305.7 million. And for teams like the Buffalo Bills, that will matter. I am Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus. Thank you for joining Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. And the reason I bring up the salary cap, I generally don't like talking about it too much just because my eyes glaze over and there's a lot of different things to discuss, and it's easy to get something wrong when you're talking about how the salary cap works and exactly what you can do with this contract, and if you cut this person by June 1st and et cetera and whatnot. But the Bills are tight. They're already over the cap. They're not compliant. And when the new league year starts next week, they're going to have to be compliant. And one of the reasons I bring this up is because there's been some interesting messaging coming from the Bills. And let me lay out a few things. We, of course, have heard since Joe Brady got hired that he is in the Sean Payton tree. We've heard it over and over and over again. We've heard him and Brandon Beane mention Drew Brees' name over and over and over again. We have heard Joe Brady use that line, hey, I know I got my master's degree from Penn State, but I got my PhD in New Orleans, over and over and over again. And so one other thing that we're starting to hear repeatedly as the Bills were at the combine doing all the different interviews, going through the car wash of the media interviews, the local interviews, TV, print, radio, the gambit. They keep slipping in comments about how much money Josh Allen makes. And that pertains to the Saints in a little bit, because the Saints were known for being in salary cap purgatory throughout Drew Brees' 15 or 16 years in New Orleans. Yes, they did win that one Super Bowl, which is great. And I'm sure Bills fans would take it. But they reached the NFC Championship game only 2 other times, had a losing record 5 times, and missed the playoffs 6 times in those 16 years, I think it was. So that's a lot of losing that went in, mixed in, that the Bills fans aren't used to since Josh Allen arrived. And I don't know if the Saints are that model, but the Josh Allen comments are interesting to me, Jonah. And I find it fascinating that Joe Brady and Brandon Beane have been dropping these comments. They're in alignment on it, apparently, that while maintaining expectations, I believe, with the fans and the media about, well, maybe we don't make the big splash, or don't get excited, or don't get your hopes up. That way, if they do make the big splash, if they do swing that big deal to get the free agent receiver or make a trade, that you can say, see, whoa, then they look that much better. All right, we did pull it off. Whoo! even with Josh Allen's contract. Or if they don't pull it off, even if they try in earnest and maybe come up just short in a negotiation here or there, they could at least say, yeah, we've been telling you this. So it is managing expectations. But on one hand, they keep telling you, hey, look at all that stuff the Saints were able to do with Sean Payton and Drew Brees. And on the other hand, they want you to maybe also understand that the Saints also struggled a lot to deal with having one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
You might be right that this is all a messaging ploy, or mostly a messaging ploy, and that Brandon Beane and Joe Brady are synergistic in their desire to massage expectations and get the fan base and the league and media to understand why or why not they go a certain way in free agency. There's a strong uh, feeling from the fan base and even from NFL fans and NFL observers outside of the Bills fan base that the Bills need to make a big splash at wide receiver to give Josh Allen more help and more weapons, and that
Or an edge
Brandon Beane,
rusher trading for Max Crosby, right?
well, or an edge rusher, because you really can't do all of these things. The Bills probably can maneuver the cap and restructure some contracts to make one big free agent signing, but maybe not more than one. Although last year they got a wide receiver that they paid a decent amount for and a edge rusher that they paid a pretty good salary for. I don't know if they'll do that again, but it can be done, perhaps. But I don't think they're being as sneaky as you are implying, while acknowledging that maybe they are, because I think that's real. Josh Allen has the fifth biggest cap hit in the NFL right now. And the Bills, if they have a salary cap crunch, and there's ways they can maneuver to gain more cap room, but right now they're over the cap and don't have a lot of money to spend. That's the biggest number. If you're looking at the Bills salary chart and you're trying to write a mock off season or do the exercise, that's the biggest number you have to deal with and factor into the calculations. There's only 12 million of the 56 that Josh Allen's owed that can be converted into bonus, or converting the bonus only saves 12 million. There's other players that they can get a larger percentage of the cap number, but not a bigger overall number. And so it's just the reality of the situation. And I think I was listening to WGR radio today when you guys were talking about this, and it's being painted as this Josh Allen excuse that the Bills can't get a wide receiver because of Josh Allen's contract. That's not the case. They still could get a big money receiver or the edge rusher, whatever they need,
Yeah, but
but they are limited in their spending power overall because they have a $56 million quarterback. And last year he was the 10th highest paid quarterback, which is still high, but not as high. And it's just a reality of the situation. The Bills had previous years when Josh Allen was either still on his rookie deal or his extension hadn't kicked in, or 2 years ago he was slightly underpaid. And last year they decided to do his deal in a way that saved a little bit of cap room. So they kept pushing this number down the line, and now Josh Allen, uh, who he is, 2 years removed from his MVP season, you can't expect to be paying him any less. It's how the NFL salary cap works, and it is an excuse, but I think it's a valid excuse. The Bills can't pay premium salaries at a lot of positions because they're paying a premium salary at the most expensive, but also the most important position right now.
well, I think that this falls in line with the rationalization. That's not the right word. The reconciliation Bills fans are having regarding Brandon Beane being promoted and sticking around because he's the one who has to figure this out. And if he is the one dropping the hints that this is going to be hard, I think we'd rather hear that, yeah, we're going to get it done, as opposed to, I don't know. It's like an okey doke. And again, I don't. I think we're being worked. I don't think. I think it's closer. I think we're in agreement, Jonah. Uh, I think it's just, again, managing expectations. That is a huge aspect of a general manager's job. It's, or a head coach, or anybody, a front office, is to be able to manage your fans' expectations. And sliding in these comments whether it be from Joe Brady or Brandon Beane about the quarterback's contract, is just a reminder that, yeah, we're going to try, but we might not be able to do it. And that's the thing that is, I think I'm not aggravated by it as much as I'm pointing it out that, hey, we notice, we see what you're up to here. And, Josh Allen is the type of player that Bills fans have been waiting, or I'll just say Buffalo sports fans have been waiting for. Same with Jack Eichel and probably Dominic Hasek before him. You got to figure out what to do with these guys. Or with Darcy Regier fumbling away Drury and Briere. Like, you finally have something, now manage it. Don't lose it. And here you have Josh Allen signed for 6 years, $330 million, a third of $1 billion over the course of that contract. And it's 18.6% of the Bills' salary cap this year, what he has. And then his APY percent, I don't have that in front of me. I want to say it was like 19 or 20%, but it's 13th in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes makes a bigger percentage of the Chiefs salary cap. Joe Burrow has the biggest percent of his team's salary cap. And of course, they might not make the playoffs every year. So that's something that they're dealing with. Dak Prescott is second. Tua Tagovailoa is higher. So yeah, you can see how teams can get themselves in a position. Jalen Hurts has a bigger percentage of his team salary cap. Howie Roseman has found a way to do it, right? He's considered one of the great exemplars of how to get it done, despite having a roster that needs to get paid and finding good players and figuring out a way to do it, unlike Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis down in New Orleans all those years. So anyways, I just found it interesting that that is something where we keep things that you just hear, your antenna gets up. You start hearing things over and over and over again as you're a member of the media. Now, Pat McAfee may not pick up on the comment of Josh Allen makes a lot of money because, he's hearing Brandon Beane say this once within 5 feet of him. Whereas when you cover the team and your local media, we've heard 12, 20. I mean, there's a lot of Brandon Beane interviews out there that I haven't even heard yet. Joe Brady, the same thing. But everyone you hear, you start hearing the same things over and over, and you get to identify exactly what their messaging is and what they're trying to accomplish with it.
I would argue that Brandon Beane has figured out a way to get it done for the most part coming into this season. He signed Joey Bosa last year. That wasn't really expected. They filled the various holes. They did all of these extensions last year with Greg Rousseau, Khalil Shakir, Terrell Bernard. They signed James Cook. It seemed a year ago that was something the Bills couldn't afford, or that was a position where the Bills needed to save money. But the pressure built that, the Bills should re-sign him and pay him what he was worth. And he had a NFL rushing champion season, and that turned out. But you can't do that with every player at every position and every draft pick year after year after year, while also adding in free agency. It's just eventually the chickens come home to roost, or the roosters come home to chicken, or whatever that phrase is. And I think really what, Brandon Beane, I think, worked some big baller Beane magic in years past. And in last year, his magic didn't work, but he tried. I don't think Brandon Beane, I have a higher opinion of Brandon Beane than I think the average Bills fan does, and especially the work that he did in the last offseason. But I think he struck out swinging. He didn't strike out looking, and he didn't, hit a dribbler to first base or not try. He tried, and things didn't work. The big swings he took didn't work, but I still think they were the right swings, or he was swinging at the right pitches. But you can't do that year after year after year. And the problem the Bills are facing is that they went all in to try to win in 2022 and 2023, and then they recalibrated and went a little bit back all in last year, or they went back in that direction last year after the surprise success they had in 2024 as far as cap and the roster and things like that. And what should have happened is the Bills should have won a Super Bowl one of these past years and be taking their medicine now and saying, oh, we have this big Josh Allen extension kicking in, and we paid some different guys. We're a little bit of an older team. We've been picking at the bottom of the first round. Have a year, not that you want that, but you have a year like the Saints had after you win the Super Bowl, because the Bills haven't won the Super Bowl. They haven't gotten over the playoff wall. They're still trying to go for it again and again and again, while these bills come due. And, you can keep pushing. They've restructured Josh Allen's contract every opportunity they've had to do that, and that's gotten them short-term money, but it's pushed more and more money into the future where eventually uh, you just can't do it year after year after year. And I'm gonna let you talk, but I have another point about Josh Allen coming out of that. I just kind of want to get your reaction to that.
No, I just was going to say that the Saints, when they won the Super Bowl, they went 11-5 the next season, 13-3 the season after that, but then went 7-9, 11-5, 7-9, 7-9, 7-9. Um, they struggled. They had, they were pushing money down into the future. They were reworking deals. They were cutting good players. They were unable to re-sign their own dudes. And that's something that if the Bills are going to keep dropping these New Orleans Saints references, then talking about Josh Allen's contract being a trick to navigate, then then I think we need to start looking at, well, the Saints had that issue too. And if your PhD is in how the Saints do business, then maybe you need to, buckle up.
Yeah. Well, and that style of cap management and roster building is a cautionary tale. There's some other teams that have done that. There's other franchises in other sports with different salary cap rules that have operated that way, or the way the Dallas Cowboys did years ago in the 90s, paying players and finding ways to put the money on the cap later. It is a cautionary tale. I'm not so sure that Joe Brady, being of the Sean Payton coaching tree and revering Sean Payton's sideline coaching, extrapolates to Brandon Beane wanting to manage the cap the same way that the New Orleans Saints did. But it's a fair point. But what I would argue, not really with you, but with a lot of the Bills fans, or some of the sentiment I heard on the radio today, and even people on Twitter that I could tell were listening to your radio program and reacting to that, is that, if you're a Bills fan that believes Brandon Beane has not given Josh Allen enough weapons, and specifically the number one wide receiver they need, because I think in terms of volume of receivers and weapons on offense and the offensive line and the running game, the Bills have a lot of offensive talent, and I think they might even have more of their cap dollars invested in the offense and the defense at this point in time. But they have not gotten the star receiver and number one receiver since they traded Stephon Diggs. They haven't really replaced that element of the offense, and that seemed to be a sore spot this past season. But you can't hold that opinion, but also be averse to the don't blame Josh Allen's contract for not having the cap room to go after the number one receiver. There is a balancing act there of having a $50 million quarterback and not being able to afford a $30 million wide receiver, or having a $50 million quarterback protected by a good offensive line and a $10 or $12 million running back and not being able to afford that $30 million wide receiver. Josh Allen, with his contract and his ability and his percentage of the cap, he deserves every dollar, and you don't change anything about that. And it doesn't mean he's not worth even more than what they're paying for him, but he has to, in some ways, win by himself, or he has to make the wide receivers better. He has to make the passing game better. If you're paying a franchise quarterback that franchise quarterback contract, he has to carry your franchise. You can't have an all-star Pro Bowl wide receiver unit. That Bills had that when Josh Allen was still on his rookie contract, or still being paid less. So there is some element of, you don't get to have the MVP quarterback throwing to MVP wide receivers with a rushing champion and an offensive line. And a lot of what Brandon Beane said, I don't know if he said it much this week, but he said it in offseason past, or this offseason past, is that the Bills kind of made a choice to protect Josh Allen with offensive linemen instead of give him weapons on the outside. That they got to save money on some positions. They probably wanted to save money on running back, but weren't able to do that. And they decided to not skimp on the offensive line. We'll see what they do with the holes they have going into this offseason. But they've skimped a little bit on wide receivers, and you have to skimp somewhere.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You can't get it all done. I think it's just I'm having some Josh Allen crutch fatigue. Everything from Terry Pagula, Josh was crying, so we had to fire Sean McDermott. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but it's not that much of a stretch. We can't have our quarterback crying in there. and then all the different ways of trying to make Josh happy by hiring the coach that would make him the happiest. And but now they're pointing at his contract of, well, maybe we can't afford to get him all the things that we need to get him to win the game. So Joe Brady, I guess, is going to have to overcome Josh Allen's contract too, or whatever roster shortfalls have to be made, or sacrifices that need to be made, to use your word. Joe Brady is going to have to coach around that and coach him beyond those sacrifices. I
Or,
haven't. Oh, go ahead.
well, I would just say, or because there is ways you can always create some short-term cap room with void years and restructures and cutting a few different players. The Bills are going to probably cut Curtis Samuel and a few others to create some cap space. The NFL salary cap functions like a soft cap in many ways, but doing so is the Saints strategy. If the Bills go all in to get the star wide receiver and fill the different holes they have in the offensive line and get some of the new defensive players they need for Jim Leonard's scheme without cutting major players, they work all that magic. They can do it for this season, but they're only going to face a bigger salary crunch in the offseason and have to cut good players and restructure deals and take their medicine down the line at some point.
I was remiss. I should have mentioned this at the top, but we're going to have John Wawrow from the Associated Press on the podcast. He is fresh back from the Olympics, where he was covering the women's hockey for the world, really. He was, when you cover anything for the Associated Press, you're really writing for the entire planet. And he was the guy on the spot. And of course, he's has a long history of covering women's hockey, so he's an authority there. And we're going to talk about what's been going on with the men's hockey team and the stories that he's had to write regarding that. It'll be a journalism discussion more than a political discussion, so don't roll your eyes too forcefully. Jonah, anything else you want to get to before we get to a break and bring on John Wawrow? We have some time to any other
Yeah, there's a
notes?
couple little things. I mean, maybe just to update our listeners if they're not following as closely as I am from something we discussed last week, but some of the latest bracketology, specifically Joe Lunardi at ESPN, has Michigan coming back to Buffalo now as a number one seed. I don't know.
Oh,
Now, this is all unpredictable. The committee doesn't leak out what they're going to do, so you can't really figure out why that is.
but
But
Joe
uh,
Lenardi has quite the batting average, right? So if
right, he's good at predicting things, and so it could have something to do with Michigan losing and not necessarily being the number one overall seed anymore and having less say in where they go. It could have something to do with uh, maybe the committee can figure out a way to put Michigan and Buffalo and still get them to Chicago and satisfy what Michigan really wants out of the deal. Maybe Joe Lunardi, from his sourcing or his beliefs, decides that the NCAA isn't going to let Michigan, drive that ship as much as they want to. I don't know if it has to do with Duke being the number one overall seed and having the seeding preference or not, but that's still in play. Michigan requesting, I think that's real because it got reported in a number of different places by a number of different reporters. Requesting to start in Philadelphia is real, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how it'll play out on Selection Sunday, and we still have some intrigue with that.
What else in local colleges as we head towards March Madness, Jonah? Anything that we need to know about the Big Four?
Well, the Big Four, not much. I mean, UB is probably going to be the eighth seed in the MAC and play undefeated Miami in the quarterfinal
A
round of the
team that
MAC
they've been
tournament.
competitive against twice.
Team they've been competitive against twice, so that could be an interesting upset opportunity for UB. And interesting from the national perspective to see an undefeated team lose and how that would affect their potential for getting into the tournament, or if the MAC can get two teams in, that would be a bit of a financial boost for all the schools in the league, UB included. But I don't really think UB as the eighth seed can be counted on to make a run all the way into winning that tournament. They're not playing their best ball of late. Their best player's been out in and out of the lineup with concussions, and I don't know when he's going to come back. Uh, and that they're maybe the best team of the four. I mean, or
I
the
don't think we've
eighth.
talked about St. Bonaventure this entire basketball season, Jonah.
So, say Bonaventure won last night at Rhode Island. They're playing a little bit better. Every team makes the Atlantic 10 tournament, so their season's not over. They have some talented players, or why they went 11-2, and I had high expectations for them early in the season. And with Mark Schmidt coaching, I think they can beat their seed and play well and advance further in the A10 than their 12, 13, 11 seed might portend. But the way they've played in the Atlantic 10 and 4 wins, I think 11 losses or whatever their loss total is, I don't see how they can win 4 in a row in that tournament with the way that that tournament's structured and the difficulty to win from the bottom of the bracket. They can win a few games, maybe pull off an upset and show well at the tournament, but I don't think they're going to go all the way to winning, and they don't have a record that's going to get them into the postseason without winning that tournament.
What do we make of the Adrian Wojnarowski career change now as St. Bonaventure is a middling organization? Is that supposed to spark something, kind of create a little local basketball factory? It's already been it's a storied institution, and I get it, and they love their basketball, but has he moved the needle at all?
I think he's moved the needle in perception and
But 11-2 or 11
some
and
of
12.
the national discussion about St. Bonaventure, and he did this NBA combine, professional combine in New York City that got scouts and agents and Tom Thibodeau to attend. So I do think he's moved the needle somewhat, but it didn't translate to a winning season. Well, they do have a winning record, but it hasn't translated to a.
Wait, what's their record? I thought you said 11 and 12.
They're a losing team in the Atlantic 10, but because they were 11-2 non-conference, I do think
Oh, I see.
they're
You did say
somewhere around. I got to look it up to see the exact, but I think they're about 15-13 or somewhere around 15-15.
got it.
15 wins is what I do believe they have. I could look it up while we're talking.
Yeah.
Dan Meyer can look up the point spread while we're doing this. But and I do think he did pretty well in the transfer portal. They got considered a great get, Joe Grahovic. They got Frank Mitchell transferring back from Minnesota. He had played for Canisius as one of the best rebounders in the country, and he's having a pretty good year. They got some guards from overseas that were considered good gets and had played some professional ball. And I do think he did pretty well. But this transfer hall roster that Adrian Wojnarowski built hasn't seemed to mesh with Mark Schmidt's coaching as well as Mark Schmidt recruiting his own players did in years past. Now, this might just be a 1 year anomaly of this group and this coaching staff, or they're running it a bit, and a lot of teams in college basketball are a bit like an NBA system where one person picks the players and another person coaches them, where college basketball has traditionally been the coach as general manager. So it's still year one, really, of Adrian Wojnarowski building the roster for Mark Schmidt to coach. And it didn't work out perfectly, although it looks pretty good 13 games into the season. But we'll see how this trend continues into future seasons.
St. Bonaventure is 15-13, 4-11 in the A10, has not won consecutive games in the conference at all, and they haven't won consecutive games anywhere since December when they beat UB and Colgate.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm sorry, that was part of a 5-game winning streak that also included Bloomsburg, whatever that is, Florida Atlantic, East Carolina, and then have lost a lot of games since then. They play at George Mason tomorrow afternoon, then at George Washington, then home against Davidson before starting the A10 tournament. Niagara Canisius, are they worth talking about?
Well, no, Niagara and Canisius are not going to make the Metro Atlantic tournament in men's or women's basketball.
How about Damon? We both heard from old friend Mike McDonald today.
About the same thing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. He compared me to Sir Paul McCartney.
That's a high compliment.
Yes. But Damon is number 4 in the country, number 1 in the region, very likely to host the NCAA tournament, the start of the NCAA tournament in their gym for the second year in a row, undefeated in the conference for the second year in a row. They're the first team in that conference to do that in more than 30 years. Only 1 regular season loss this year after no regular season losses last year. Healthier now than they were a month or so ago. So things are going very well at Damon. Damon women are top 15 in the country, number 4 in the region. They're probably not as likely to host NCAA tournament games, but very likely to host their conference tournament and then make it to the NCAA tournament under first-year coach Nate Butel, another F of the show.
F's all over the place.
Yeah, so they're doing well. I don't know. I'm focused a lot on the high school basketball. These playoffs are underway and finals next week, and then going to try to circle back to the colleges going into, March Madness championship week and then the NCAA tournament here in Buffalo, which I'm excited for.
I'll be covering that for the Athletic. I'm looking forward to it.
And speaking of champions, Jessie Pegula is the reigning champion in women's tennis, having won the Dubai tournament last weekend. It's her 10th career singles title, fourth at the WTA 1000 level, which I think I know what that means, but I don't know if I can explain it. But that's the highest level of women's tennis.
The third franchise.
Yeah, I just don't know the difference between 1,000 and 500. But there is a
Probably
difference.
like the SNP.
It's not like NASCAR. It's not 1,000 laps or 500 laps or miles or whatever that. I don't even know what that means. There's no Daytona 1000 either.
I think it means it's time for a break, and we'll bring in John Wawrow from the Associated Press to talk about Olympic hockey and some Buffalo Sabres with the trade deadline coming up right after this.
There's a good chance he got drunk during the commercial break. It's Tim Graham and friends.
Pleased to be joined now by longtime F and Associated Press sports reporter John Wawrow, who is fresh.
That's me.
Back from the Olympics and a little gallivanting post-Olympics, but there was no stoppage of news. It should be stated up front here that your role for the Associated Press was to cover all things women's hockey and to be involved in what the men's hockey had with its gravitational pull and the political discussions about it, and the women being, or at least feeling as though they were made the butt of a joke. And it's been I'm sure not as clean of a transition from Milan to Elmwood Village. Wait, was that the neighborhood what neighborhood do you live in?
That the Elmwood Village is correct.
Are you in
Yes.
Elmwood Village? Okay.
That is correct.
So
A long way from Montreux, Switzerland, where we actually got a break, my wife and I.
yeah, but it probably wasn't as long of a break and you had to monitor things. I guess just where are you as your feet are planted back on US soil here, John? And we'll take a look at that and then we'll rewind a little bit.
Really catching up on things. I hit the ground running, especially since Monday night it was Monday. Sorry, it was Monday night my time in Switzerland when I was on my balcony enjoying a glass of wine with my dear wife Mary Lou, and all of a sudden my Slack channel went haywire. Because the American women had declined an invitation to attend the State of the Union address. And this was Monday. Yes, so it was Monday afternoon, U.S. time, Eastern time, when this all came down, and all of a sudden, everything got thrust through a political lens when that happened. And I think it was growing and building, especially when we saw Kash Patel chugging beers with the men in the locker room after the men's gold medal victory. There were hints of it during the women's tournament, and that was mostly with the women. When J.D. Vance and his large entourage, his family, his large entourage of who's who people, Jake Paul was involved, and then there was a big delegation, and of course there was all the security people. When they showed up at the smaller arena to watch two of the women's preliminary games, there was a big buzz back then in the early going, but the women stayed over top of it. They said they never noticed J.D. Vance. We were too busy focused on hockey. They never allowed themselves to get pulled into the political realm. And I really credit that to them. Whereas the men, seem to relish it. They seem to want to get pulled into that. They were happy to share that with anybody and everybody who was wanted to be a part of it. And I think it's come to backfire on them.
John, I guess here at the top, we have, and I'm not sure how it gets quantified these days, especially as the changing landscape of media has, um, it just it changes faster. It changes often and it changes faster than it ever did. I guess expedited was
Yep.
the word I'm looking for. This exponential reshaping of how we view our media and how we produce media. I believe that the Associated Press is still the number one news gathering agency in the world.
I think so.
And so I'm asking this from a purely practical standpoint. We are on a Zoom here with the Associated Press reporter who is covering this story. And yet there's a belief out there, and I kind of understand it, but let's walk through it. A lot of people, we get feedback that they enjoy our journalism discussions on here. A lot of
I
people
do.
believe that this is not a story or should not be a story. Here you are, your job is to write news stories. I guess I should say it is a story, it's not news. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we could look at this. And here you are, a news reporter who is writing these stories that are being picked up by newspapers and all media outlets, internet and whatever. So people are consuming these. You are clearly writing them. Your editors are assigning you these. It's being walk us through just the concept of, is this news? Is it not? And people being upset that you are actually practicing this journalism.
Well, I mean, just looking at my Twitter feed based on the explainer, and an explainer is just explaining what the situation, how the whole situation evolved. I just wrote that this morning, and it's been on the wire for a couple of hours, and the media's been referred to as scolds. It's the media's fault that all this has happened because I just don't understand how it is the media's fault when we weren't the ones who were that laughed when President Donald Trump, made an offhanded remark about, well, I'd get impeached if I didn't invite the women, which seemed demeaning, and I think, as Billie Jean King put it today, was an uncomfortable moment. So maybe it was an uncomfortable laugh on behalf of the men's part, but the men had difficulty explaining why they laughed. They said they were caught up in the moment. I get that. But then we had Jeremy Swayman, the Boston Bruins goalie, who came out and said we should have handled that better. So there's got to be an element of truth. We're searching for a truth, or as we all do as reporters, we're searching to what the truth is, to what is transpired. And again, I go back to what Hillary Knight said, because again, the women consciously did not allow them to get caught up in the gravitational pull of politics. And I credit them for them. I credit them very much for that because they very much could have. We in the media were asking them questions about J.D. Vance, about Donald Trump, about the situation in Minnesota where a lot of the players play and have been dealing with the whole ICE situation there. And they spoke out about that, but they did not allow that to enter their consciousness or the narrative in Milan. So how the media made this the story, I'm not exactly sure, because this is all part of what today's world is, in which there are polarizing issues out there that need to be asked. This isn't about sports. This isn't a stick to sports moment, because if it were, then Kash Patel, I don't think, would be in the men's locker room. So it's convenient to blame the media for being the ones who are reporting this, whereas we're only seeing what's happening and trying to put everything into perspective in today's world. I hope I put that. I hope I put that as succinctly as I could,
As succinctly as you could.
as I could, and I
Uh,
can be long-winded.
no, no, I think that ties it up in terms of your view as a news gatherer, as a journalist, as a storyteller, as somebody whose job is to share this information again, not just in Buffalo, but with the world. That's the role of the Associated Press, and quite an obligation at that. Um, I think too that there's um, it's easy to blame the media when something makes you feel awkward or uncomfortable, or if you just wanted to enjoy the moment, let me enjoy my Super Bowl halftime show without giving me this or without making it that. This is supposed to unite the country, stop dividing us. So, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, the fact that I believe I don't recall the publication, but it was that whereas the women, as you said, controlled their own story, the men, and I don't, not purposely, but they allowed their story to be co-opted by somebody else and kind of hijacked a little bit. Quick question, I guess. Is the PR arm of USA Hockey, how different are the ones who handle the women and handle the men, or do they overlap in any way?
They do overlap.
Okay, well then, how could it be? How do you think it was driven so differently by each team?
I do think there was an element. Well, I'll put it to you this way: they overlap. We had the same. They had three media people there in Milan. One person handled the men, one person handled the women, and they had one overlap between the two. However, let's remember too that I think for you, from USA Hockey's perspective, they cede control to the NHL. This is, for the most part, this was Bill Guerin's team. This is the NHL's team, and they simply handle the media relations side of it, meaning access to the players or what have you. But whatever the team says goes, being allowing Cash Patel into the locker room. I will say that there may have been worries that JD Vance wanted to meet with the team. I think that was somewhat rebuffed. And I'm not saying that in a purely political way. I just don't think that the women wanted to meet with anybody outside of their own circle to be sidetracked from what their goal was. They knew how good they were, and they knew that they did not want to get, again, swept up in this whole patriotic zeal. They're very patriotic. Do not get me wrong. And there are differing sides. There are players on both aisles of this spectrum on that women's team. But they spoke as a collective and through Hillary Knight, who was their captain. Whereas the men's side, again, this goes to whoever we allow ourselves to let in is who we allow ourselves to let in, and that was their choice.
Jonah, your turn.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to add. I don't know. I think as well. I haven't really. I've been paying attention to what it is, but I don't have a strong take on it. I don't think too much of this is surprising. I think the reactions and which side of the political spectrum, even though, the women's team is trying to avoid politicizing this, falls along demographics and areas of the country and social groups that it's predictable. Like I don't think anything's been all that surprising into who's been favored by certain political parties or certain political groups and how this is played out. That I guess I'd ask John, Canada's kind of role in this dynamic, being the team that the U.S. beat. A lot of these NHL players and the PWHL players play for Canadian teams. There's players that play for American teams on the Canadian rosters, and there's political opposition between the U.S. and Canada in various ways on certain issues. And how do you feel that U.S. versus Canada in those games and the left versus right political divides that stemmed out of the post-game celebrations played into each other?
I think this is where we get a little bit different between men's and women because when it comes to the women, they have been, you know, the rivalry between Canada and the US is real on the women's side. but there is solidarity among the players because this is the generation that has made the PWHL possible. So that they are very accustomed to working together and respecting each side, whether you're Canadian or American. It doesn't mean left or right, but this goes back to the launch of the PWHL, where Hilary Knight worked with Marie-Philippe Poulin. These are the two respective captains. Worked with worked with European players to get this whole thing together to meet their vision, their collective vision of a sustainable professional hockey league. There is not that recent history among the men. The men have known the NHL since they were born. So there hasn't been this collective working together on the men's side as there was on the women's side. So there's a little bit more, I think, inherent respect between the women and their backgrounds, be it Canadian or whatever nationality, as there is among the men. And the rivalries are real. And I think this is a little bit new to the men's side too, because let's remember also that this is the first time that the NHL has been to the Olympics since 2014. So there's that also to factor in. But yeah, I'm going to end there. But I do say that the women have been in this together. So I think that's why we're getting a different response and a different feel from the women than we are on the men's side. And I think they're taking it more. The women haven't taken the women are more accustomed to being at the Olympics as well.
Is
So
it fair to say then, I guess, that from the women's side, it's more gender driven motivation because of women's empowerment? These are all players from different countries that are trying to pull together with the PWHL to unionize and to build from nothing a organization that can be self-sustaining, and we all need to be in this together. Whereas you say the National Hockey League guys, it doesn't matter to them, and in some ways the union is against the league, and whatever. You can more easily just break up into your national categories when you're from the men's side, whereas the women are there's so much about empowerment in sports and being pioneers and forging paths together.
That's well put, and I think this is another watershed moment, I think, for women's sports, because I think what we're seeing in the aftermath of this is a larger focus. The women are really getting a boost from this. Their numbers are way up this week as far as PWHL traffic. I think they've sold out their this first game back in Seattle is sold out, where Hilary Knight is the captain. And their team isn't very good right now, but they're sold out. And I think we're seeing a large upswell of support for the women here. And it's because of how they acted, and I think how they responded, and I think how they performed on the ice. This was some of the best. This was the best women's hockey I've seen played at any level, at any point, and it's gone. It's such a level higher than it was just 4 years ago in Beijing, and I think that really says a lot of good things about where women's hockey is heading.
Do you think there will be any opposite effect or polar effect with any of the men's players, and specifically ones, Tage Thompson is being honored before the Sabres game on Tuesday. Him and Jack Hughes were honored before the game last Wednesday, but I don't know if Austin Matthews is going to be honored, or maybe he wouldn't be anyways, but it just seems different for him and Brady Tkachuk and some of these players who are stars on Canadian teams coming back to the NHL, and whether their perception and popularity has been affected by this at all.
I think there's some reservations in some markets, especially in Canada. You still, I mean, if you're a Senators fan, you're still, I guess, supporting Brady Tkachuk. I don't want to speak for people there, but I think there's a wariness or a different perception to some things, even though Brady Tkachuk did not say what This AI doctored video was shared by the White House. He did not say any of that. He's denied saying close the northern border. I believe him. I think he's very in tune of what the fact that he is playing on a Canadian team. But I think that this whole thing does paint, just color it just a tinge that may may reflect a little bit more poorly on the American players. Even in America, I think depending if you're on the left or the right, if you're on the right, you're fine, I guess. But I think it opens up people's eyes as to where these players stand and and who they support. And that's part of society anywhere in many ways. But I do think this. I don't think it helps the NHL in the big picture as much as it's helping the PWHL right now.
Yeah, I that's a great point. Do you think there's any reservations or regret from the NHL because of how this has rolled out? Do you think there's any second guessing in that regard of our involvement is being used and now we can't, it's hard for us to control this. We are being politicized as a league. The NFL went through it. The NBA's gone, everybody's kind of gone through it, but I'm sure you use the word wariness. There may be a weariness regarding, yeah, can't we just have a hockey thing that is great for hockey and have it not be have everybody groan at the aspect of it turning political?
I think everybody hates the fact that it's turned political. I agree. I do think Gary Bettman said, we're fine with everything that happened. I may be wrong. I was traveling on Wednesday, but I understand Gary Bettman came out and spoke on this issue, but I can't recall what he had said because I did not read the stories on that. But I do think had the American men stopped at the Jack Hughes iconic picture of a toothless grin wrapped in American flag, or the celebration of Johnny Gaudreau with Zach Werenski and I believe it was Matthew Tkachuk who brought out Gaudreau's jersey onto the ice as the celebration, and then brought out his two sons. That was a perfect element. That was a perfect moment to celebrate. And I think everybody on both sides of the aisle, on both borders, no less, could accept that. But it just seems that everything changed once the once I guess the president called in some ways. That seems when everything changed, rightly or wrongly, however you want to perceive it. The president can more than right has the right to make that call. He didn't call the women, by the way. But I think it was the joke that kind of started to color it, and the invitation, and then everything that followed, just kind of like just seemed uncomfortable.
I
Well,
think
and
there is a unifying feeling, though, regardless of right or left, of the visceral reaction of seeing Cash Patel in there from a sports fan or people who are into sports who would see anybody, whether it was, Joe Biden or pick a person, it doesn't matter, of the concept of you didn't earn that. Like, let these guys enjoy their moment. So there's that, there's that touched off part of it. That to me was apolitical. That was, I think we could all get on board that this guy's acting like a doofus. But then it just didn't stop at that. Jonah, I'm
well,
sorry,
both
I cut you off.
I was just gonna say both of these things, or the politics of this would have played out differently if one or both of these gold medals were won by Canada. And if you think back to the Miracle on Ice in 1980, that was a very political moment. It is the legendary status of that has more to do with the geopolitics than the actual hockey that was played in some ways. And I guess maybe it's some part of the United States being this dominant superpower in so many different ways, but in hockey, it's a bit of an underdog to either Canada or for different reasons to the Soviet Union back in 1980. But if Canada had won that gold medal game, Cash Patel's probably not celebrating the silver medal in the locker room, and the call doesn't happen, and the juxtaposition is different if the women don't win their gold medal. The Four Nations Classic last year was very good for hockey and very good for all of the countries involved, but Canada winning that game, didn't set the same powder keg off that the United States winning this game did.
John,
I
but
I do agree with you there, Jonah. Yeah.
I was just going to say, this pops into my head. And so maybe, again, I don't believe that any of these stories, whether written as just the facts, as the Associated Press does, or somebody's writing a column about this, I think this is all fair comment and fair reporting. And of course, it's a story. This isn't concocted, this isn't a media creation. But I wonder, though, and we're talking about the difference between the men's and the women's viewpoint of it. The media that covers the NHL, these guys come back. And so I think that there is a media amplification, maybe, maybe not totally appropriate. I don't want to say inappropriate, but maybe it's oversized because you have all these guys who come back now to their NHL teams. And every city or every that covers has multiple outlets covering. And so now they get all their local reporters are now talking to them. Whereas when you cover the PWHL, it's a lot fewer reporters.
Hmm.
And I think that they're centralized. Like you are one of the very few national PWHL or women's hockey reporters in the world. And so a lot of things go through John Wawrow or go through a couple of other reporters. Whereas you come back to your 32 different NHL teams, or however many, there's not 32, but whatever, 20, and you have your reporters and your TVs and your radios and your whatever, and you're being asked these questions. Every person on the roster, every person who played for the U.S. Is being asked about this on the men's side because of they're in the NHL, whereas the women, it's they can avoid this. It is what I don't know. I don't know if there's something to explore there, but I guess just an acknowledgement that the it's lopsided in terms of the coverage, and so the men I think are getting more. They're getting scrutinized appropriately, but more so than the women.
To a degree, but also I think they deserve that scrutiny just because of what their actions were, and I think there are more questions to be answered there. That's not to say that Hillary Knight really started. Not I don't want to say started this, but she really launched. She helped form the women's response to this on an ESPN interview that took place, I believe, on Wednesday.
It was
And then,
galvanized, and coming through from one person makes a big difference.
yes, correct.
One figure.
But this is all at the same time that all the women Olympians were also made available to the media, but more so the NHL, and there are more people that do cover the NHL. Although I think the Seattle Torrent press conference was very heavily attended, and there were a lot of local media there from every outlet in Seattle. Mind you, the national outlets weren't there because we were all traveling, but there were a lot of people there for that event, and I think it was important that Hillary spoke on that. But you're right, more what there are more media covering the NHL, and there are more markets in the NHL. However, what I don't understand is the response from some of the players being, why are you making this political when they're the ones who made this political? There seems to be a disconnect among some of the players who are wondering, well, how did this get so political? How did it not? Is really my question.
Do you want to actually talk about the hockey that was played?
Yes,
John? It was.
yes. Let's focus on the
What's
hockey.
your overview on the hockey that you covered?
The women's team is the best. The U.S. women's team is played the best hockey I have ever seen. They stepped up. I thought the Canadians in 2022 were remarkable at elevating the game. But and pardon me, my Slack thing is all happening here. Um, the U.S. women's team right now
Do you have breaking news,
elevate.
John? Do you need to tend to
No,
work
it's not breaking news. It's people just congratulating me on something. So
for being on Tim
whatever.
Graham and Friends?
That must be it. That must be it. They just heard. Uh, the U.S. women's team elevated the game by leaps and bounds from what I thought was a very impressive Canadian team that dominated the tournament in 2022. What the depth of talent, the depth of young talent that the Americans have makes them the immediate favorites in 2030. And it's impressive to see that a team with a mix of veterans in Hillary Knight, Alex Carpenter, Lee Steckline, Buffalo's own Haley Skimura, who played a very important role as the 13th forward on this team, mixed in with a bunch of youngsters. There are 7 collegians on that roster, and all of them will likely be picked in the first or second round of the PWHL draft, starting with Caroline Harvey, who might very well become the world's best women's hockey player ever because she is that good and she's phenomenal to watch. It was impressive to see her earn the MVP and quarterback, not just the power play, but just the back end. I thought this was just exceptional hockey to watch on a women's from on any hockey scale, but from a women's perspective, and to see how Canada nearly pulled it off, I thought was very inspiring and endearing to a team that was too old and too slow, that was accused of being too old and too slow to take the U.S. to the brink of being upset.
John, didn't I tell you before you left you'd be writing about Haley Skimura?
I was so happy she scored 2 goals in the U.S.'s first game, and Haley came through the mix zone. It's a long, it's like a cattle run. It's like they have to go through the broadcast media, the other media, and then finally to the print media. And Haley, I said, Haley, how's it going? And she thought I was just saying hello. And because you always have to say hello, as they say in Seinfeld, you can't say hello. But no, I go, Haley, I'm finally writing a story about you today. She goes, oh my gosh. So that was fun to do because she has really persevered through a lot, was really not on the national team radar up until maybe 7 years ago, and became as I said, you've become a Jill of all trades player. I corrected myself by calling her a Jack of all trades and said, no, you're a Jill of all trades type of player. And she really played an important role on that team. And kudos to her because she's earned that gold.
A Buffalo Jill of all trades.
There
Tim,
you
can
go.
I get your take on this though? Can we decide, is she a Gettsville native, an Amherst native, a Williamsville native, a Buffalo native, or, where we have to make this
Well, so
determination?
we have had this discussion before, and when I came up in journalism, native was where you were born. Now the definition has been loosened, and it is now pretty much anything can be a native. And also, I used to be a stickler for whether or not your alma mater was based on where you graduated from, I thought. But now even if you went there, it's your alma mater. And I think, of course, because when it comes to sports, everybody likes to say alma mater, but you don't know if the guy graduated because, maybe he didn't go to class or he left after 3 years, and we don't know if he did his online courses. But
Or
yeah,
guys now
native.
go to 4 different schools. Do they have 4 alma maters?
Yeah, I think so. I think, but for me, so if she was, I don't think you can, well, you can be born in Gettsville, you can be born on a couch, I guess. I mean, but there's no hospital in Gettsville to be born. So it depends on where you were born. Yeah, like,
He's officially listed from Buffalo on the USA Hockey
like the
roster.
Right.
Gronkowskis. I remember asking the dad. He's not
It's
Gordy.
Gord.
Sorry,
Gordy,
Gordy with a
yeah.
Y.
Yeah.
Gordy with an IE is the oldest. So yeah, I was asking Gordy one time, where was Rob born? So that way I could say what native he was, because everywhere he was listed as a Buffalo native, but to me that wasn't accurate. And then, but if he was born at Women's and Children's, then that would be accurate. Even though he went to Williamsville schools, maybe he was born at Millard. So anyway, um, I hate to say, I guess I'll reveal it, but Gordy didn't remember
Huh.
where Rob was born. Uh, John, the Sabres are back in action, and the NHL trade deadline is next Friday at 3 p.m. I guess we'll leave you with this as we transition back from Milan to the KeyBank Center. What are your expectations of covering the Sabres here in the next week or so?
Well, I think they're going to make a trade. I think Yarmo is going to improve this team, which is something that Kevin Adams didn't do at the trade deadline for so many years. Wow, it seems like so long ago that, but only so recently that we covered Kevin Adams as the GM. But I expect a trade. What happens with Alex Tuck? I guess is going to be the big question. I don't. I was kind of trying to follow the whole Alex Tuck situation. I'm still not sure if he's worth the money that he's asking for, and I don't think the Sabres should pay him that kind of money. I think he's more of a $8 million player over 6 years than an $8 million player over 10 years or whatever the asking price is. I don't think Yarmo is going to pay the price, but he may keep Alex Tuck on the roster because they need to make the playoffs. And this isn't going to be 3 years ago where they were happy to be in a playoff run and fall 1 point short of, or well, a win short of beating Florida. I think they're in it to get into the playoffs and see what happens. And I think this is a team that, heaven forbid, I'm saying this, could actually win a round based on how they're performing right now.
Do you have a position in mind or a type of player that you think the Sabres will add at the deadline?
I think they still need a forward someplace. But I'd have to look at the raw. It's been so. It feels like I've been gone for a year, never mind a month. And the last time I covered a Sabres game was, oh shoot, it was the reunion game with all the guys back from the 2005-06 team. So it's
The
been a
one
while
good thing
since I
about that,
covered.
John, though, is that nothing happened while you were gone. So at least it's easy to get caught up.
True.
It's not like
Yeah.
you have
Yes.
3 weeks of Sabres games to revisit and see what the trends are.
No, you're right. You're right. I did miss the last week or so of their season, of their schedule before the break, and I couldn't see the game against Florida, or sorry, at New Jersey the other night. But I still think they need a little bit more offense, but you can never hurt getting a defenseman, so I'm sorry for middling the answer.
All right. John Wawrow, middling is coverage, which you're supposed to
Yeah.
do, which you're supposed to do at the Associated Press, right? You need to, down the middle, down the middle.
Well, they don't need a goalie.
Right.
But they might need to trade a
Could
goalie.
stand upgrade, I guess,
Well, you're right. They could trade somebody, but we'll. I guess we'll see. That's what the next week is for.
John Wawrow, thanks for this. Welcome back. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you over a plate of wings and a couple of beers very soon.
I
Keep
would love that.
decompressing. Keep getting
Mhm.
used to Eastern time zone. Welcome back.
Thanks, guys.
And thanks to everybody for watching and listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants.